As we always do at this time, let's bring in our senior journalists as well as specialist desk editors to open up their reporters' notebooks for you in terms of the stories that they'll be pursuing this particular week. We start with SABC News International Editor Sophie Mokoena, who is, of course, at the Liberation Movement Summit out in Kempton Park. Sophie, good afternoon. Let's start with that. That is one of the big stories that we are tracking over this weekend going into the new week.
Yes, you are correct, Chulas. As you pointed out, the president of the ANC has just spoken. I must confess, when you look at the different contributions by different leaders of these liberation organizations, I think for me the most powerful contributions came from the president of SWAPO, who is also the president of Namibia, and the president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, who is also the president of the ANC, because they were quite frank in terms of the challenges facing the liberation organizations in the southern region, including at the level of government, those who are still in power. And Menandi indicating that you have to deal with issues of corruption, issues of unemployment, issues of poverty. Very, very frank contribution. When I listen to what she said, it's almost similar to the speech she delivered during her inauguration. Quite frank, brutal, and honest. But the question is, action must be implemented. And therefore, on the other hand, you had the president of South Africa, who's the president of the ANC, being very frank, particularly weighing in on the challenges facing the liberation organizations and the countries. As you look at the new generation, how restless the young people are, not only in this region, but on the continent in general, and saying that the time has come for the leaders to talk about these things. He touched on issues of corruption, issues of minerals, the rare minerals, and the scramble for Africa, but also the regime change. Regime change in a sense that when you have nations that are disgruntled because of the failure of the leadership, then you will have opportunists who want to wrestle the minerals, the rare minerals you have, because the current industrial revolution revolves around having access to these rare minerals. You cannot put together, manufacture a phone or a battery, car or computer without the rare minerals that are found on the continent. Now, in the same way, during industrialization that led to what America is, what Europe is, the minerals were extracted from the continent, your gold, your platinum, your diamond. Now the rare minerals, you are facing a similar scramble for Africa, but not forgetting to say, let's do introspection in terms of where we have veered off the road. But others were very diplomatic.
Sophie, before we move on, talk about Minister Lamula and his visit to New York, I want us to stay with that story a little bit longer. I sensed a certain defiance, not only in the statements that were being made by President Ramaphosa at the podium, but also even in the composition, some of the composition of this Liberation Movement Summit. What am I talking about? Washington recently, elements in Washington, let's call it that, expressing their dissatisfaction and unhappiness about South Africa's leaning towards China, Russia. So please talk to that, the presence of representatives from countries that elements in Washington are not happy with. But not only that, the president then going on to use the kind of language that has been raised, for instance, in that bill before the Congress in the United States that is calling for sanctions to be imposed on certain leaders of government, as well as the ANC, the president defiant even on that score.
very defiant. And this defiance, I saw it, experienced it, had him during the BRICS summit in Brazil. He was very, very defiant. In fact, the South African input at the BRICS summit in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro, contributed to the radical position taken by BRICS in Brazil. And you saw President Lula continuing with that kind of approach, being very defiant even last week when Trump decided to impose tariffs against Brazil, and also speaking out strongly against what's happening in Gaza. That South-South voice again emerging. And here it was a similar approach. I think many people have indicated that the president of the ANC, in his capacity of the president of the country on national issues, he's been making some steps that are not so pleasing to the citizens. But on the other hand, he does something that's unexpected based on how people have viewed him in many occasions when they analyze his presidency and who he is and the support base. For example, taking those radical policies that has led to tension, where you see these Afrikaner groups going to America, mobilizing, where radical policies have been adopted, like the one on education, like the one on economy, and of course the international position in Gaza, Ukraine, and many other areas. And therefore, when coming to very critical global issues, he is very, very, very firm and defiant. He did that now, and I think in the presence of delegates who are representing China, who are representing Russia is here, and you have the Fatah from Palestine here. So it was that kind of a Ramaphosa, the leader of the ANC, who at international level, he doesn't really be diplomatic. He's quite frank and brutal. And Lamula is leaving today to Washington to an important gathering on the Palestine question.
Yeah, say a bit more about that then, Sophie. What's that about the visit to New York by Minister Ronald Lamula of DERCO?
There's a gathering at the UN that is going to look at, member states are going to look at the situation in the Middle East. Now, you know that South Africa has been at the forefront to try and mobilize support for ordinary Palestinians to ensure that their quest for self-determination is achieved, but also to stop the current misery we see in Gaza. This past week, we saw those visuals and images coming from Gaza of children dying of hunger at this day and age. So that meeting will be discussing that. So the minister is going to New York, and this is what she is going to do to contribute to the discourse and discussions around the situation in Gaza. We saw the SG of the UN issuing a statement lamenting the situation there. We saw the head of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros, showing us the pictures they captured as World Health Organization, the situation that they are dealing with in Gaza, where children, malnutrition, children are dying because there's no food. And Israel is adamant in terms of its action. We saw an announcement earlier today that they will allow the humanitarian assistance to get to Gaza. I can tell you before end of business, it will be a different story.
Lastly, and very quickly, Sophie, this week we expect the tariffs, the U.S. tariffs on imports into that country from South Africa to kick in unless a deal is struck. There's a framework agreement, but we're not at a trade deal stage yet. So as things stand, we are likely going to face those tariffs.
Well, I don't know whether we will face those tariffs. President Trump is quite unpredictable. He's a transactional leader. If there's something happening behind the scenes, we may see a situation where he is likely going to announce postponement of implementation of these tariffs, not only for South Africa, but for other countries, because it looks like this threat that he imposed on many people, some powerful nations such as China are not deterred, are not intimidated.
Yeah.
And therefore, we don't know what's going to happen on Friday,
All
but
right.
if he remains adamant, that's what's going to happen.
All right, Sophie, let's leave it there for this afternoon. That's Sophie Mokoena, SABC News International Editor.